Hi everybody, you are listening to the Medea podcast series. Medea Medical Education Academy is a global medical education provider dedicated to designing, delivering and evaluating medical education programs worldwide. Today we are going to speak with Trevor Angell, Assistant Professor of Clinical Medicine and Associate Director of the Thyroid Center in the Division of Endocrinology and Diabetes at Keck School of Medicine of the University of Southern California. This podcast, Patients, Social Media and Thyroid Disorders, an exploration of personalized treatment, guiding patients to safe sources of information, including a patient interview, is part of the continuing medical education program entitled Blended Learning Journey on Thyroid Disorders. The target audience for this program is clinicians involved in endocrinology, particularly thyroid disorders, and general practice. All materials will be suitable for all geographic regions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Trevor Angell. I'm an endocrinologist and an associate professor of clinical medicine at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, United States. Our learning objectives today are that by the end of the podcast, learners should be able to discuss the issues with health information delivered via the internet and social media, and feel empowered to recommend reliable online sources to patients.
Roughly how many patients have researched their medical problems online before their GP or hospital appointment?
The previous data have shown that a high percentage of patients may be using the internet to obtain health information, perhaps 35 to 80%, depending on the study. And the data are largely influenced by changes that have occurred over time, access to the internet, geographic location, and even maybe more specific changes related to things like the recent pandemic. The Health Information National Trends Survey from 2019 had over 5,000 respondents in the United States population, found that 86% engaged with social media and 41% watched health-related videos. Another internet-based survey of 600 reported about 25% of respondents use social media for health information. Now, these data don't tell us whether or not patients are obtaining this online information prior to their appointments. But a telephone survey by the Pew Research Center 10 years ago found that 34% of adults who responded said that they use the internet to try and figure out their medical condition before discussing it with a doctor. Now, I will say anecdotally, in my experience in Los Angeles, California, many, if not most, of my patients have used the internet to seek greater understanding of their condition before they see me. Now, there have always been alternative sources of information. Patients have and continue to tell me something that they know that's from a family member or a friend that they consider authoritative because it comes from a personal source. And people tend to trust information that comes from within their group and aren't naturally forming opinions using evidence-based medicine that doctors are typically using to make assessments. The difference that we can highlight is that social media, while it continues to form social groups being made by users for users, really extends that information out to very distant reaches, and we have to be very careful about the information that's coming from those sources.
How do you counter entrenched viewpoints which are dangerous or wrong?
So it's clearly my responsibility to counter very directly views that are, to my understanding, both wrong and dangerous. I'm thinking for the thyroid, things such as, alternative unproven treatments for overt hyperthyroidism or overt hypothyroidism, for thyroid cancer that would avoid traditional treatments like surgery or potentially radioactive iodine, the use of T3 during pregnancy. These are things that I think we need to be very firm about our understanding of what is in the patient's best interest. Sometimes entrenched viewpoints may be wrong as far as we know, but not necessarily dangerous. And I think in that standpoint, we really need to be understanding about the patient's interest in their own health, the measures that they've taken often out of frustration to find information that's helpful to them and really engage in a conversation about what they think is true and make an informed decision. Examples may be that patients say, that they have to be on a gluten-free diet because they have autoimmune thyroid disease or Hashimoto's. Now, I don't think that the evidence would tell us that that is necessarily the case, but it is also potentially not dangerous for someone to adhere to a gluten-free diet if they want to. So I want to discuss with them, why that information may not be correct, but I'm not going to demand that they not do it just because their understanding of their disease might have some incorrect information.
What are the main issues that you have to address when patients are badly informed by online websites?
The main issue is not just bad information or misinformation, but how convinced patients can become by the information that they've seen. I think many can relate to a visit when a patient meets with a doctor and starts with, I know the thyroid controls everything. I know that thyroid tests are not accurate. I know I don't convert T4 to T3. One thing I would say is to encourage patients to resist the temptation to start with the doctor this way, regardless of, frustration or hopelessness that they may feel, and really bring up things they may have seen with an open mind. Because it is very hard to establish rapport when there appears to be an unwillingness on both sides to honestly investigate the situation, the symptoms, what might be causing them, and then come to a plan rather than starting out feeling like people are not willing to talk about what might be going on.
Can you give us some examples?
Some of the main examples that I have to address with misinformation have to do with the timing of thyroid hormone administration, because people may see on social media anything from with meals to very far after meals to different times of day. Not only that, believe that there is a very rigid, rules or restrictions around this. And so I think it's very important to have a discussion and provide information that the doctor is going to have to put what the patient may have seen into context. There are things we know about the absorption of levothyroxine being limited in many cases by timing of eating or medications, but also things we don't know or areas where there may be some flexibility that we may need to discuss with the patient and see what their preferences are. Another example is different diets that people may have heard about, whether that is gluten, dairy, certain other restrictions that they believe are necessary because of what they may have seen related to thyroid disease. It's important to have a dialogue and discuss that by and large, there aren't confirmed necessary diets or supplements or things that people need to be on, but perhaps some evidence of where things might be beneficial. And even though we don't have strong data to support it, perhaps things that people might want to try and help them be more invested in their health, in ways that wouldn't be deleterious to them. Lastly, I think entrenched views about thyroid testing are very important to address. People who have heard about measurement of not only TSH and free T4, but T3, reverse T3, and other potential tests. And really, again, to try and bring open information about what these tests mean, how they relate to thyroid function, how they often don't relate to what thyroid status is or what a patient's symptoms might be. One thing that I always like to try and do is to show people where there is a grain of truth to what they're saying to me, not to dismiss it out of hand, but to say, I can understand why that information may have been presented to you because there is this aspect or this piece of data that's out there. And then to say, but that doesn't mean that what you've concluded is true. And to, help us move forward by saying that.
Is there a lot of misinformation in the media about thyroid disorders?
Information through much of the mainstream media, I think, tends to be simplified and probably a little sensationalistic. The media does try and maybe present information, but also captivate an audience. One of the main themes might be generalization about a condition or a treatment or a prognosis. So I think it's very important that anything that might be heard about a famous person's condition or a new scientific discovery, is relayed back to a patient's doctor to have a discussion about how that might relate to an individual's circumstance.
Can you suggest some good, scientifically rigorous sources that patients can access online that explain thyroid diseases thoroughly but simply?
So there are some excellent online resources that would be available to anyone with the internet. One that I use frequently is through the American Thyroid Association patient information pages. These are drafted by experts and reviewed by patients, especially for how it will be easy to understand by a non-medical reader. And the majority of these are translated into Spanish language at this point, and I know that they would try and further that as well. For those interested in new insights in the field of thyroid, there's also clinical thyroidology for the public, which takes expert reviews of recent publications and makes version of these that are more easily read by the patients and the public. There are certainly a number of good websites that are dedicated to conveying health information to the public generally. I'm thinking of the Centers for Disease Control in the United States or the World Health Organization that'll have some information about almost any disease you could think of, including the thyroid. I think these sources may not represent every valid idea or perspective, but they don't have dangerous, scientifically inaccurate information that people might encounter in social media. I think interestingly, there's a real opportunity for artificial intelligence to start to provide patient level information. However, there was a recent publication in the journal Thyroid that assessed using ChatGPT when asked common patient questions about thyroid nodules. And while it found generally accurate information, they were unable to get answers at a reading level that would be considered appropriate for all patients, despite prompts to specifically try to get it to do so. So I think the technology still needs some development there. I think my perspective may be skewed towards what we see in the United States, and I'm sure that there are similar public resources in many places. I think the thing to stress is that whatever information people are obtaining from the internet or social media, to make sure to discuss this with their specialist or general practitioner, especially if they're making any decisions about treatment, and not to self-medicate or make changes without having a thorough medical discussion.
What take-home messages do we have at the end of this podcast?
I think firstly, we should recognize that a large number of patients are obtaining information from the internet and particularly social media, and that information on social media has a high likelihood of containing misinformation or incomplete information. I think the second point is to really understand the importance of having these conversations between the patient and the provider, being open in talking to your doctor about the information that you've obtained, be open about soliciting opinions and thoughts from the patient and not dismissing them out of hand, but being ready to explain the best science and correct misinformation where we find it as physicians. Lastly, I think the take-home point is to use and find strong available online sources for patients to use, especially if they've already used the internet as a source for medical information, can show them new places on the internet to get high quality information.
After having spoken to Professor Angell, we now ask a few questions to a patient with thyroid issues and his use of social media and internet to find more information.
Hi everyone, my name is John and I've had hypothyroidism since 1999. My thyroid problems derive from radiotherapy, which basically dried up the gland. As a consequence, I started increasing in weight. The problem was that it took a while to figure out it was a thyroid problem, so I lost a year. When I found out at that point, I started having levothyroxine. It did not solve the weight problems, but at least I was not getting heavier.
Did and do you use social media to find information on thyroid disorders?
Yes, particularly the Facebook groups where there is a lot of sharing of problems and questions, especially for those people who have to wait for a long time to see a doctor and want to know more on their tests. I never ask questions, but it is interesting to see how people are coping, and I do relate to them in some way. All kinds of questions arise from medication to supplements to psychological issues, diets, other health problems. Some correlated to the thyroid, others not. Occasionally, there is a sharing of an article. I choose the groups that have a lot of followers. I think they're more reliable since if there are more than 100,000 people, it is more likely to be useful. More than actually gaining information, I find peace because I'm not the only one with thyroid problems, and that gives me a sense of common ground with many. But occasionally, something does pop up, which makes me wonder whether it can be of benefit to me.
Did you check this information with your GP or endocrinologist? And has it helped in the management of your disease?
Yes, I always check. Sometimes I have the info before he does. Fortunately, I have developed a good relationship with my GP, so if I get the news before he does, he listens and takes it into account. I'm also lucky to have a good friend who is an endocrinologist, so any immediate questions are relayed to him. I do trust this specialist more than the patients, so I always verify.
What resources have you accessed online that have helped you better understand thyroid diseases?
The guidelines for the treatment of hypothyroidism from the American Thyroid Association has been very useful in understanding certain things. I got this via an Italian website for patients that is now defunct. As mentioned, Facebook groups have been also helpful, but I have stayed in those with a lot of followers. They seem to me to be more trustworthy.
Thank you for listening to this Medea podcast. For more information about our continuing medical education programs, please visit our website at medeaacademy.com.